But I think social is an interesting one where you have players like Facebook trying to take steps into commerce. Could they use this next 6 to 12 months to capitalize on the shift to online, particularly in these categories where Amazon isn't traditionally great at?
On this episode of E-commerce Deep Dive, I speak with Rick Watson. Rick is a veteran of e-commerce and marketplaces, and we have a wide-ranging discussion. We cover the impact of COVID on different channels with e-commerce, how consumers are behaving in different ways online. We talk about the future role of social, Facebook, Instagram, etc., on commerce and how that may impact Amazon's competitive moat. I think you'll get a lot of value out of this. I know I did. Without further ado, here we go. Why don't we just start out? Tell our audience a little bit about you, what you're up to today, and just kind of your background in the e-commerce space.
Yeah, thanks, John. My background is really started out as a technologist. I've been in and around the e-commerce industry as an entrepreneur and as an operator for the past 20 years. I kind of got my start learning really in the marketplace world. One of the first several employees at a company called Channel Advisor, which is one of the pioneers in the marketplace industry back going back all the way to 1999. So I'm dating myself a little bit, even
Sure.
before Amazon had a marketplace and eBay kind of was still the king of everything.
Yep.
So I really building the initial versions of Channel Advisor's platform and then running the product and engineering teams there. So that was kind of the first 10 years of my career. So that really kind of formed the foundation of like how I thought about the e-commerce world, I would say. From there, I was actually recruited to New York City to launch and operate the barnesandnoble.com third-party marketplace, kind of building that
Hmm.
from really zero and a bunch of alternative categories. So I have an interesting perspective being able to build a marketplace from the ground up and all the policies and recruitment and fraud and all those things required to make that possible. And then from there, I was involved with a private label marketplace and dropship platform called Merchantry, where I was CEO for over 2.5 years that we ended up selling. And then finally, the last couple of years of my career was with Pitney Bowes global e-commerce team, particularly in the cross-border business, which runs eBay's global shipping program as well as kind of the border-free business. So that's kind of the quick tour of my history. In the last year, I've actually gone out on my own. I founded my own strategic e-commerce consultancy where I work with primarily investors and management teams, helping them wade into this whole direct to consumer space, mostly around strategic questions, and then incubating these new businesses and getting them off the ground.
Awesome. So you deal with kind of e-commerce overall, so across platforms, direct to consumer, Amazon, eBay, you name it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, anything from and what's interesting is the types of people I work with are not just the brands and the retailers. I also work a lot with the service providers too. So because of my background at Channel Advisor and software companies, I'm able to speak to the CEO, like an entrepreneur CEO who's trying to sell something new to Amazon sellers or trying to build a new supply chain tool for returns for direct to consumer, and they need help with the go-to-market strategy, as well as the investor who needs to then go back and hire all those people.
I know we talked about this a little bit before we hit record here, but you work a lot with organizations and kind of give them advice, consult on how to structure an organization internally to approach e-commerce and to maximize the opportunity. What are some of the things that you still see organizations getting wrong in their approach to e-commerce in terms of kind of internal structurally from a budgeting perspective? Kind of what are people not getting?
Yeah, I think there are two big things I find. One of them is they're treating e-commerce technology like MIS or a help desk function. So, this is a true story. I was in a major retailer in a call in the last couple of months, and it, the whole organization reported up to the same person who, if your desk phone, back when we still had desk phones before COVID, um,
Yep. Sure.
um, when your desk phone wasn't working, the same person when your desk phone wasn't working was the same person you called if your e-commerce site wasn't functioning. So,
Huh.
so organizational alignment for, to me, having a technology leader that really thinks like your customers do. For instance, your parcel path and your customer flow and your financial flows, those need to be managed by someone more strategic
Yeah.
than is someone who's like, if your Outlook isn't working or your Gmail isn't working. So I would say that's one big
Yeah.
issue we have. And then I would say from a budgeting point of view, I think the big thing is that people don't know what to expect when they start on their direct to consumer journey. They don't know what the line items they should be. They don't know what the margins they should be looking at. They don't know. They don't realize how complicated the space is. They're like, oh, we should
Yeah.
just be able to put up a website and be done. I mean, just dozens of software platforms, probably half a dozen agencies that you'll have to work with just to make the thing run on a day to day basis.
Sure. Sure. How, we still see a lot of conflict between sales and marketing functions internally. And conflict may even be an overstatement,
Uh
but
huh.
just, I mean, same budgets ultimately, or kind of different budgets going to the same platforms, the same mechanisms through which you'd spend that budget can just create inherent conflict, not to mention kind of the some of the other incentives and alignment issues. How do you kind of give advice on how to align sales and marketing teams? Is that something specifically you get into?
Yeah, definitely that's the case because a lot of times, particularly you have cross-channel conflicts. Who gets, we still in 2020 still have questions about who gets credit for the sale.
Yep.
Should the store get credit or the store or the e-com get credit and how those work together? So I think from a sales and marketing point of view, usually that has to do with attribution and if you're a rep in the account, you want to be paid more and you think you've done it all yourself, whereas the marketing team needs to understand what's working and what's not working, what should we not be spending money on. So those are definitely topics that we give advice on when we go into a client. Yeah.
Hey everyone, John Giorso here. I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. I wanted to let you know that this episode has been brought to you by Orca Pacific, the agency I founded to help brands succeed on the Amazon platform. If you need any services that relate to success on the platform, whether it be content, advertising, SEO, help on the back end when it comes to operational support, etc., training for your team, or even just some advice on a place you may be stuck, feel free to reach out to our team. The best way to get in touch with us is on LinkedIn or at orcapac, orcapac.com. I know it's hard to have a conversation about e-commerce without talking about the COVID impact. It's obviously impacted all of our day-to-day lives, but it's also impacted the businesses that we're in a significant way. What's interesting to me in the e-commerce world is it's not all bad. I mean, there's clearly a headwind here. Consumer spending is down. There's lots of
Right.
disruption to
Right.
supply
Right.
chains, all kinds of things. But then obviously there's a big shift from brick and mortar to online shopping as well. So you kind of have these countervailing forces. I mean, what have you seen over the last even couple weeks in terms of the biggest impacts to e-commerce from this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest impacts overall is, um, there are a couple of different things. I think you see behavior shifts, shift from to online spend, particularly across a few categories: essentials, pharmacy, and then home improvement. In
Hmm.
particular, has been pretty strong. I think a lot of other categories are very much down, between 30 and 80%, depending on who you talk to and kind of where you fall along that continuum of, if you're have a nice designer dress, that's you're going to go out to a dinner and a movie. Clearly you aren't doing that now. um,
Sure.
and as well as the restaurants and those places that depend on people going out are down a lot. I think if you look at some of those behavior changes, people are getting more comfortable ordering online. I think pickup, like, not necessarily pickup in store, but curbside pickup seems to be getting a lot more traction
Yep.
now than before. And I think what we're seeing is that people that are a little bit younger and people that are a little bit older are getting more comfortable with uh, purchasing online as well, whereas kind of the mainstream I think was online.
Do you think that has staying power? I mean, do you think that that stays around? Vaccine is here 18 months from now, totally back to normal. Do you think people keep buying online, or do you think they kind of say, "Wow, I miss going to the store"?
Yeah, I think you know it's interesting. I think the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, this morning was talking about this topic. I don't think you ever go back to the old normal. I think there will be a new normal. I do think some of it has staying power. I don't think it will snap. I don't think it'll snap back 100%. And I don't think it'll stay where it is now either. What I do feel is that once you start to form those habits, you become comfortable doing something in a pinch. Whereas in a year or 2 years, we might be wondering why ecom penetration in particular categories has ticked up twice the last 3 years in terms of its penetration. It's because someone rather than going to the grocery going making that Costco run every single week, maybe you might skip a week, or you might order if something is not quite as convenient. You won't go out of your way to do it because you'll just do it when you get home, and then you'll wait for the next time. So I do feel some of that stuff will snap back,
Yeah,
will have staying power.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. What has the impact been on logistics in the e-commerce realm? From this new COVID dynamic.
Yeah, I see all the shippers really scrambling and trying to streamline what their operations are. I mean, you see Walmart and Amazon as the most visible. I haven't seen sort of UPS and FedEx saying like, "Look, we're going to hire like 150,000 more workers," like I have with those
Yeah,
companies, which is I think interesting on its own. Um, and maybe it's because of union dynamics in one of them, and something else in another. But um, the the obvious Amazon answer is, they made some pretty big FBA changes that inconvenienced a lot of sellers. Um, from an FBA point of view, Amazon just yesterday, I believe, announced that they're even stopping their pilot independent third-party shipping program, which I wrote about a little bit this morning. That So they put that whole program on pause for non-Amazon parcels, Amazon shipping, non-Amazon parcels. So I think Amazon is just really in a kind of a wartime mode. They are, if
yeah,
it's not essential, we're going to cut it. Prime inventory, I think, is down overall. Certainly, delivery promise dates have been pushed out very far, um, and there doesn't seem to be Amazon, the person who sort of invented the hyper focus on metrics in e-commerce, really. If you think about their marketplace standards like ODR and all these things, um, they're they've kind of thrown caution to the wind with all that. So
yeah, yeah.
it's like
Absolutely.
1 week, what's 4 weeks between friends? Like, why do we care?
Yeah, yeah. It is funny how much they've just thrown that out for the time being. It's a 3 week ship window, or it's 4 days, or you order it in 3 weeks and get it in 4 days. We don't know. Just
Right.
figure it out. Um, yeah, it's actually been bizarre from my perspective to watch these dynamics, and there's all kinds of volatility too. We're seeing, some brands where they have a top seller in a category that has a 3 week ship window, and then their competitor is a 2 day ship window, but they're a lower seller, and then it's a categorization thing. There's all kinds of
Right.
wacky stuff going on. I mean,
Yeah, I heard
in
about that
terms of,
bug, that oops bug, where if Amazon didn't have the item, they still didn't surface the lower shipping rate from even their 1P vendors.
yeah, that was actually a big problem. They've since resolved it, but yeah, it was. I mean, in normal circumstances, a prime offer will always be faster than a dropship offer. But if Prime offers all of a sudden are 3 weeks and the dropship offers 5 days, then yeah, they were still surfacing. Yeah, I mean, there's so many second order effects of these kind of overnight changes that have rippled through the platform. It's been fairly chaotic. my obviously my purview is Amazon, but I'm curious, have you seen that same dynamic with the other platforms, D2C, eBay, Walmart, those guys as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen timeframes push back across the board. I think Amazon benefits disproportionately from being the leader. Um,
Just because 'cause they're the go-to,
they're
"Oh, I
just
need to buy
such
this
the
online
go-to
now."
from
Yeah,
everyone, and so I
yeah.
think the effects are really muted,
Interesting.
by and large across just from a supply chain point of view. Look, they have the big problem that I you talk to some businesses, and if they were shipping non-essential products, like let's say out of Manhattan, then they can't really do that anymore.
Yeah,
Some of these were Amazon sellers shipping, um, seller fulfilled Prime out of their office in Manhattan.
sure. Yep,
And they're like, "Well, can't do that anymore. Our office building is closed.
yeah,
So let me scramble on that side." But I think for broader ecom, the biggest problem is that volumes are way down. And so I think, you know, a UPS or a FedEx or a company at that scale is able to kind of absorb and flex their network from that point of view, just because they're across so many broad categories.
when you say volumes are down, you mean overall consumer spending is down.
Yeah, overall
Is
consumer
that what you mean?
spending is down, and in particular, what I'm referring to is the non-essentials, more or less.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting for us, like from our perspective on Amazon, we're actually starting to see now consistent elevated levels of demand over and above what we would
Wow.
expect this time of
Huh.
year for non-essential products, but the conversion rate's lower because there's still a lot of them are in a position where they don't
Well,
have a prime offer now.
yeah.
So it's interesting. So that this has been it's like a big question mark for me still, and we're starting to see some preliminary data. I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, but it's the idea that we know the overall pie is going to be smaller. Like we're in a recession,
Yeah.
consumer
Yeah.
spending's down significantly. We know that that pie is going to be smaller, but can Amazon pick up such a bigger piece of it that their overall sales actually remain elevated? And we know that that's the case in essential product, but we're starting to see indicators that it might also be the case in non-essential product, which is really interesting. Are you seeing that in other channels as well, or is it just still kind of overall suppressed because all of retail's suppressed?
I think eBay has been down, but not terribly down.
Hmm,
From my conversations, eBay has generally been a relatively recession-proof business. Because it's usually off price. It's a
yeah,
lot of times a channel of last resort for a lot of these merchandise. It's unique inventory. It's the original market for anything that needs a price. Like, what should
sure,
this cost? I don't know. Let's put it on eBay.
yeah,
Um, so I think in those sorts of channels, we are seeing a little bit different behavior. On Amazon, it's interesting you mentioned that. Without having seen the data, I would suspect that, look, traffic is up for essentials. I mean, you're having to um, check Amazon over and over to get a delivery window, right?
yeah,
And so some of that traffic, if you're not shopping for Amazon for non-essentials, you might be more apt to cross shop, which would
yeah,
kind of go to your point that um, traffic is up, conversion is down. I mean, those things are inverse in e-commerce generally, right? So those things kind of add up. And if
yeah,
Amazon, if the consumer is already on Amazon and Amazon is good at cross-selling, which we know they're amazing at it, um,
yep,
so
yeah,
I think they're going to benefit from this for sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you think about the Q4 dynamic where obviously toys, gifts, consumer electronics are massively spiking in Q4, but then you also see spikes in things like applesauce and socks because people are just on the platform more and they're just shopping more in general. So I agree. I think what we may be seeing is the same dynamic, plus that's exacerbated by the fact that people just aren't going to physical stores. So I mean,
Yeah,
just
and
more of
and
that
look,
volume shifts. But
this is the same company that figured out that if you watch a video on Amazon Prime Video, that you're gonna buy more shoes. So I'm pretty
yeah,
sure they're they're gonna figure out how to
yeah,
capture more share from this.
yeah, yeah. Agreed, agreed. Um, So, longer term, I guess let's say over the next like 6 months, um, e- I think we've kind of determined Amazon's probably a winner in the aggregate due to this new, changing consumer behavior. Are there any other channels or retailers, eBay, Walmart, direct to consumer, any specific platforms that you think are going to be disproportionate winners or particularly positioned to take advantage of this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the social channels I think could be winners,
Hmm.
because people are chatting more. I think all the gaming platforms have
Yeah.
benefited. If you look at like Tencent and their business in Asia, um, and Microsoft and Sony are reporting like I don't know huge increases in volume. Um, but I think social is an interesting one, where you have players like Facebook trying to take steps into commerce. Could they use this next 6 to 12 months to capitalize on the shift to online, particularly in these categories where Amazon isn't traditionally great at?
Yeah.
Um, like fashion or beauty, or like even no one
Sure.
is fantastic at beauty online,
Yeah.
just
Agree.
from the category penetration. But those are two in particular areas where if there's anyone who has a better than even shot to take share in that category, it's Instagram.
Yeah, that's so do you think are you kind of saying it's the same dynamic that we just talked about with Amazon where, they're maybe not directly benefiting from this, but if more people are using Instagram and a certain percentage of those are converting to make purchases on Instagram, they just have kind of a disproportionate win because of that? Or do you think they are more specifically going after are they, I guess, are they ramping up their e-commerce capabilities, operations, like in addition to this kind of just natural shift to social?
Yeah, I think both. So if you
Okay,
if you take your second one first, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg just 2 months ago, or 2 or 3 months ago, which seems like forever ago now, before the
sure.
crisis was on everyone's minds, he basically put commerce as one of his top three priorities, across the entire world. So they plan to be a big player in commerce, period. Across all their properties, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram. So, but in terms of, to me, like, and selling anything, particularly online, your number one, if you can get an audience that trusts you, then it becomes easier to sell anything. And so, to the extent that people are spending more time on Instagram, I think it benefits them as they continue to, um, release these tools like AR, VR into Instagram from a lens point of view, or showing how products show up, and releasing these commerce tools where you've seen some fashion and other brands testing like Instagram stores that you can promote from the fam, doing sneaker drops. And so I think it will take them a while to figure it all out, just because it's new. It's like building a new muscle for them. I mean, just think about how long Google has been trying to iterate on commerce. It feels like for 15 years, and it kind of still feels
Yeah,
like they haven't really got it right.
sure.
I think the big debate in commerce right now, from a social point of view, is like, where is Facebook on that curve, and will they end up like
Mm.
Google, kind of like so much potential but never figuring it out, or will they end up like, I don't know, like you just pick a brand like Glossier that started as a blog and now is a major player.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, I mean, I certainly understand the, I think the opportunity for social to impact commerce in a major way just because of how consumers behave and how they shop and browse and are influenced and make decisions that just makes intuitive sense to me. I guess from a more practical perspective, the piece that I struggle with in terms of can they really break through and be a significant player in e-commerce is the operations and fulfillment piece. Because, that works. That's great if you're selling a product for 39.99 with a 60% margin that, you ship direct to consumer and someone's willing to wait, you know, 5 days for it or whatever. But it's not going to work for toilet paper. It's not going to work for toasters. It's not going to work for probably 90% of purchases outside of those very like fashion oriented, kind of one off products. Do you think social ever breaks into kind of the more, not even toilet paper is an extreme example, but the more sort of just the average retail categories? I mean, do you think they can ever get there
You
and really
know,
compete?
no is I think the answer, unless we actually get to some kind of scenario that we have in China, where you have these sort of super apps. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
everyone is in their social platform and chat rooms 24/7 and just say,
Yeah.
but even in that scenario, you're probably just going to text the Amazon bot and have it ship
Yeah.
you a toilet paper.
Yeah.
So I even think Amazon could win in that world too, um, because their supply chain will be better. So I think the answer is no, and I think it's actually no for a good reason, because you, at least in the short term, you need to be where Amazon is not a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of going back to like the Southwest Airlines strategies, like let's not try to be a long haul carrier uh, internationally. Let's try to be the best we can be at the categories that make sense for our format.
Yeah.
And I think from this is sort of the history of eBay a little bit, right? They started out as collectibles and other stuff, and then it was sort of refurb, and then they tried to move into the mainstream fashion and other things, and those things just failed miserably.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't even funny. And
Yeah.
I think if I don't care who you are, like if you're Facebook, Instagram, you try to do the same thing, you'll fail the same way.
Yeah, yeah. That I agree with that. That makes sense to me. I mean, I guess like I've never questioned could Facebook have a 10 or 20 billion dollar e-commerce business, but I think when you get into like can they really compete with Amazon? Can they have 100 billion, 200 billion dollar e-commerce business? That I find that very hard to kind of
Yeah,
rectify unless there's like a massive shift because at some point you're going to get into a situation where it's just the new showrooming, where you discover and research and learn about the product on social and then you just flip over to your Amazon app and buy it, which is a very very easy thing to do as it currently stands.
right.
So I mean, I think if you don't have some sort of differentiator, exclusive, or otherwise channel that just isn't well penetrated or represented by Amazon, I mean, you're just going to have people hop over and takes an additional 3 seconds, but then you save 40 seconds, by not having to
Right.
deal with the Instagram interface or there's more confidence or whatever. So,
Yeah, where I think Facebook's opportunity is if you, I mean, look, if you're a new brand now, and generally in e-commerce, Facebook's ad rates are still lower than most players. Um,
yep.
and usually the big comparison is Google, right? And so that's, to me, that's their big opportunity. If you figure, okay, converting from Facebook to all these brands, which, a lot of them are Shopify, not all of them, but um, if Facebook is able to keep some of those people on the platform that are, everyone is trying to get them to leave anyway, then there's definitely, maybe not in essentials and things like this, but I think there's more opportunity than people would otherwise think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think we're probably on the extreme end of our perception of e-commerce a little bit. I have to check my own, bias sometimes because I'm like, well, of course, Facebook's going to have a $20 billion business. I mean, I don't even think
Yeah.
that's the consensus. So, I'm obviously, bullish on on e-commerce as I'm sure you are too.
Yeah. I think
Um,
the big challenge that these search and advertising companies have is just that advertising, you every day you wake up and you look at your bank account and you ask your accountant, it's like, how much money did we print today? Because that's what they're doing. I mean, they're just
yeah,
printing money every day
yeah,
based on things that they don't do. Commerce is so hard.
yes,
And I think
yes.
there's just like vast underestimation. And at some point, I think if you're like the Google CFO or and you sort of hope it's not the Facebook CEO, it's like, why the heck are we doing this? Like, why
Yep,
would we? Why don't we
yep.
just get back to what we know we're doing? And so I think those are some of the challenges you run into, like trying to go into a completely different segment like this.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's why Google's never figured it out because right now Google sells air. They sell nothing.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
they sell bits. That's all it is. It's
Right.
it's it's ephemeral. It has no actual cost. Either the product itself or the distribution has virtually no cost. Where Amazon has massive costs and it's very low margin, even at scale, which is why I've just thought, is that really a business? I mean, sure, the platform concept makes sense. And I thought if anyone, this was like 5 years ago, I thought if anyone could really compete with Amazon, it would be Google. If they could have really created like a true kind of platform. But again, the missing piece to me was always the physical infrastructure, which if you don't own that or have some other partner that has massive scale, none of the other stuff works. It's the pairing of that
The
digital
consumer
platform
these
infrastructure and
days,
physical.
yeah, these days the consumer is so convenience oriented that if you just introduce a little bit of friction, it's like, why am I here? Like,
Yeah,
I know I can go somewhere else and this will be easier. I'll
yeah,
go back to, the store with the checkout that takes 2 seconds and that already has my data. So it better be
yep,
very compelling, um, to you for some other reason. And that usually takes years of investment that a lot of people just don't have patience for.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I heard Dave Clark speak from Amazon once, and he said, you know, back in the day when they were first launching, he said we'd ship somebody a book. It would take like 6 days to get to their house, and they would write us an email and say, "This is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. It's like magic. Like I hit a button on my computer, and then a thing just showed up at my house." And he says now, if you miss a 1 hour ship window by like 5 minutes,
Right.
people are calling, like freaking out
Ah!
because the product is late. So yeah, I mean, consumers are absolutely spoiled by the very, very incredible bar that's been set by Amazon and others. So I agree. I mean, if you don't have, I mean, just the impact that we saw when Amazon shifted, not even nationwide, but just for a lot of urban areas, shifted from 2 day to 1 day shipping was a really significant impact on a lot of categories. So like this stuff, it matters. It matters to customers. And as soon as you go from 2 day to 1 day, now 1 day is the standard. If you can't do 1 day, then no one wants to shop on your platform. So um, yeah, so it's a real competitive advantage that they've set up for themselves. Um, well, good. I this went a bunch of different directions, Rick. I thought it was super interesting. Are there anything else that you think our audience would want to know? Anything top of mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, like on an Amazon shipping point of view, and I was just like thinking about this morning, just because Amazon shut down their sort of pilot of their independent shipping service, and I think a lot of people make the mistake when they look at Amazon shipping, they were like, oh, how are they ever going to beat FedEx rates or beat you know these rates or that rates, or how are you going to build up this infrastructure for where FedEx has been a player for so long. I think people really underestimate Amazon at their own peril in almost
Yeah,
anything.
I agree.
And look, they're already a major shipper, one of the biggest shippers in the US, number
Yep,
one. Two, they know every more detail about the customer than probably south of anyone but Facebook. You know what I mean?
yep,
So that's like two. They also know the most profitable lanes better than anyone else, and their shipping network is a bidded marketplace on the back end where you have to have amazing service and amazing rates just to get there. So they know the inputs to the business. And they use these carriers networks so much that if they can improve their margin just a little bit on the back of their current business, they have so much leverage over the rest of the shipping business. Because if you like, just imagine the headline if Amazon took 10% of their volume away from UPS, what would that do?
Yeah.
Like if you woke
Sure.
up and saw that headline, like their stock would decline 30% tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
100%. So their leverage is so high, and they can amortize the cost of the rates of every new customer that they acquire that's even not shipping Amazon parcels on the back of the lanes that they already have. Um,
Yep.
so similar to that, like they could just repeat this AWS
Yeah.
philosophy, obviously
I
not
was just going to say
quietly as
that's exactly
profitable,
what it is.
but
You
it's just
overextend the capacity, right? And then you just sell it off. Like that's all
right.
you're doing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what you're saying, and I totally agree with all that. What you're saying is this pilot's going to come back. It's just
I
paused.
think I
It's
think
just
it's going to come
paused
back,
temporarily.
and
Yeah.
the challenge is I think everyone knows it's going to come back, and there's nothing that these guys are I see doing that is going to stop them in the short term. Um, like
No, I
what are they
mean,
going to do in the next 6 months to blunt the force when Amazon opens back up?
I don't honestly know what they could do in the next 5 years. I mean,
Right. Right.
it's like it's easy to I think it's easy to disparage companies that are competing with Amazon. To go, oh, well, Walmart should have figured this out, 10
Right.
years ago,
Right.
or whoever, Target, whoever should have figured out how to compete with Amazon. Well, easier said than done. I mean,
Right.
so what would you do? Because you have, all these fixed costs and infrastructure, and you have investors that are unwilling to give you a long leash in terms of making investments in the business, unlike what they're willing to do with Amazon, probably because of the leadership. So, like, I mean, there's just dynamics that, like, what does FedEx, what does UPS do about this? They know it's coming.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't, there's only so much you can do besides just kind of sit back and watch it happen. If they could lower their rates, they probably would. If they could, expand infrastructure in a certain way, they probably would. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch. I mean, for me, I think Amazon being a major competitor to FedEx UPS is just simply inevitable. I mean, I've believed that for a long time, just based on
Yeah.
what I saw happen with AWS. To me, it's the next very obvious extension of that same model. And not to mention the fact that, like, people forget. I mean, you remember, but Amazon used to run Target's and Toys R Us's
Right.
entire e-commerce operation,
Yeah. Totally.
and at the time, the consensus was that, oh, well, they could never compete with Toys R Us, or they could never compete with Target,
Right.
because if that wasn't the consensus, it would have never been happening to begin with. So the fact that they're partners now, just that doesn't mean much to me in terms of where
Right.
this ultimately goes. So
Yeah, exactly. They're partners until they learn what your business does, and then their margin is your opportunity, as they say.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, Rick, this has been great. I mean, we'll have to do this again. I know there's probably 100 other topics we could cover. But if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to learn more about your company and what you do, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, there's kind of two ways. One is I have a website, rickwatson.io, that people can find me on, or by email. It's rick@rickwatson.io.
Very good. And for anyone who isn't doing it already, follow Rick on LinkedIn. He puts out great thoughts on a regular basis. So, Rick, thanks again for being on.
Appreciate it a lot, John.
Thanks for listening to this conversation with Rick Watson, founder and CEO of RMW Commerce Consulting. Thanks again, Rick, for being on the show. For anyone who wants to subscribe, you can do that right now on YouTube or any of the other podcast channels you listen to. If you want, go in and leave us a rating and review. It helps a lot in the rankings. And as always, we'll see you next time.